Hello, my name is Mage and welcome to Black and White Thinking, and to my thoughts and feelings on Harley Quinn Season 3, Episode 8. This episode was really good, but also super conflicting for me. This might be a slightly longer one. I have a lot to say. Let's break this down. Okay, hi. Welcome to my opinions. I have many, and I already know I feel very differently about this episode than a lot of people. I liked this episode a lot. I think it has some of the best writing in the show, and beyond that, some of the best writing I've seen in DC generally in a while. I didn't love a lot of the wider implications, and I feel like if you know who I am, you'll probably know where I'm going with this. I'm sorry. I was told to save my rage, so I will keep my womanly feelings in check, don't worry. This episode was a big one, and I think it's the first time we need to kind of reflect on what we've got so far in this season and how it's going to lead us through the penultimate and the final episode of this very much too short season. Before we actually get into the episode quickly, we were renewed for anyone that missed that announcement, which, yay. Based on recent interviews, marketing, and things, I did think that Harley Quinn was probably one of the few shows that was going to survive the Warner Brothers Discovery merger and the HBO purge. We have a new showrunner, a woman. Really glad that it's a woman. One thing that did worry me, though, is the new showrunner acted like she had been told about this through Twitter. I don't know if she was joking, but it didn't seem like she was joking, and DC and Warner Brothers generally are so bad when it comes to how they treat their employees that it would not surprise me if the new showrunner for the show found out on Twitter. Super weird. But yeah, we have a 4th season coming, and Patrick said sooner than we think, so not sure what that means, but hopefully no longer will we be waiting for like 2 odd years for another season. So yeah, the episode. This episode truly highlighted for me kind of the best and worst of this show, and kind of the best and worst of Harley representations generally. I think we'll all probably agree that this was a good episode. Harley was utilised in a way that she should have been last season, and although the resurrection plot feels a bit Bruce on acid, I'm someone that likes Batman. Like Bruce, the character, and there was a lot of really good work done here in that regard, like literal character work on Bruce and Harley, and I really appreciate that. I thought Psycho was used pretty well in this episode. He wasn't around too much. He served a purpose. The rope joke was funny. This is a good meta DC joke for DC fans. Could you imagine if Professor Marsden actually saw this rendition of Psycho? I would pay to see that. Comparatively, this episode also contained a terrible DC meta joke for fans with the CGI mustache thing. Save me. One of the reasons this review is a few days later than I would like it to have been is because I've kind of been struggling to lay out my thoughts for this one. It was hard to talk about and is hard to talk about. I, again, both loved and maybe hated it. It's left me feeling a bit weak in regards to the show. I don't know. I maintain what I said and have said all season. If anything, I believe it more now than I ever have. Ivy has looked really stupid this season in a lot of ways, and I'm pretty sure DC has blatantly meddled with how Harley and Ivy's relationship and Ivy's character has been allowed to play out this season. I think they have placed some boundaries on Ivy's characterization, and I'd bet money on it. DC does this, and they do this with Ivy specifically. She is treated terribly when it comes to having any real worth in the universe, and writers are generally left really restricted in how they're allowed to use her. Ivy is never allowed to be too relatable, and so they've shelved her for the last 3 episodes because otherwise the showrunners are going to have to make her look like a bad guy, and they clearly don't want to do that. But they are also not allowed to include her in Harley's hero arc, right? Ivy has to remain a villain. And that means that the showrunners are just kind of left in limbo with how they can utilise Ivy because, well, she can't be a hero, but she can't be a villain either. That would ruin the show. That's not the point of this show, right? So it seems like we either get dysfunctional Ivy, who no one cares to help, like early in this season, or we get very little Ivy and very little Harley and Ivy. Again, we had a Joker episode and then an entire episode where Ivy was asleep and then an entire episode where Harley was asleep. Outside of that, I really love these shots of Ivy looking after Harley and stroking her hair, ready to die a little bit if Harley did. That was lovely, and it was a good side of Ivy to see, and I did appreciate that. It would be nice if she had something to do this episode, though. Really annoyed me at the end of the episode when she was like, oh, Batman is a sellout, and Bruce Wayne hired the Bat-Kids to save him. There's no writer who can make that make sense, right? Ivy's not that stupid. End of sentence. Alright, Bruce and Harley, let's talk Bruce and Harley. That was the bulk of the episode, right? So anyone that's been following me on this channel for a while knows that I love the Gotham City Sirens, and I specifically really like the relationship with Bruce. And I don't know, I just enjoy Bruce's dynamic with each of the Sirens individually and as a group. Harley and Bruce's relationship is interesting because they understand each other in a way that, say, Ivy and Bruce do, or Selena and Bruce do, or even Ivy and Harley do. Firstly, Bruce sees himself as a pseudo-doctor, right? He sees himself as a pseudo-psychiatrist. He's always in people's head. He's that rich kid who was too lazy to do the work and then tells real doctors they don't know what they're talking about because he funded their research. They're both psychoanalytical, is my point, and they would be the world's most annoying people to play Trivial Pursuit against, probably. As much as I don't like Harley as a hero, her skills could be really utilised in the saving of Gotham pursuit that man has, if that was actually the pursuit, which isn't, and this episode very much nails that. Secondly, they are really the only characters that have any kind of important relationship with the Joker, right? They both see Mr. J as no one else does, but also they see sides of him that the other doesn't, and their kind of shared knowledge about Joker is often what saves them from falling too deeply into his mad clown schemes. One of my favourite scenes ever in DC is the scene where Harley has Bruce strapped up above the piranhas in the original Mad Love episode. And again, the kind of rollout of that scene when Bruce talks to Joker about how close Harley got to killing him and how she got closer than anyone has in a very long time. Also, look at this art by Sejic. It's awesome and I love it. It gives me many, many feelings. Bruce's trauma in this episode was handled well, I would say. It was really nice to see Harley using her skills as a doctor to help Bruce's trauma, not Batman's, to just help a little boy that she saw being sad. It's very reminiscent of All the Inmates Have Daddy Issues, and I believe the episodes have the same writer. All the Inmates is probably my favourite episode of Harley Quinn ever. In All the Inmates, Harley just wants to save the little boy she sees the Joker as, right? And he tells her the story of his ferret, and the child she actually wants to save is Ivy. I spoke about this all the way back in my original video. I don't remember everything about that video, but I do remember I said that. Harley's always trying to save everyone's inner child, right? And seeing that dynamic play out with Bruce and Harley was really nice. It was interesting to see kind of Bruce as this happy-go-lucky child in the memories, and then seeing him seconds after his parents get shot and kind of Harley joking the whole episode about how grumpy he is. It was a nice visual representation of that trauma to see him kind of skipping and giddy and ecstatic when he first leaves the theatre. Again, the resurrection plot is, I'm really not sure how I feel about it, but Bruce's character was done justice in this episode. And I guess that's kind of part of my problem. This show has identity issues. It gives me identity issues. I don't quite know what story I'm watching right now. There's been a lot of blatant reworking of this season, I know there has. When the season was first announced, the writers talked intensively about how we were going to have Ivy backstory this season and a lot more focus on Ivy, and we haven't. And I know people are going to be like, yes, we did at the beginning of that arc has not played out yet. So no, we haven't. I need to see the arc end in a way that doesn't entirely revolve around Bruce Wayne's man pain. Because this was a good episode, but for a season of television that was supposed to show us two bisexual women, two characters truly living on their own terms without the influence of a selfish dude for the first time, this season has had an awful lot of man pain. I mean, Christ, we had an entire Joker episode. Don't want to rage, but it is totally fucking stupid that Bruce gets therapy in this show before Ivy does. They also really didn't like the don't tell anyone my secret doctor-patient confidentiality thing, because no, Harley is not actually Bruce Wayne's doctor, and if Harley doesn't tell Ivy that they've been kidnapped by Bruce Wayne, who is Batman, and we continue to just see Ivy being apparently totally stupid and not noticing that, I don't know what I'm gonna do. That's just beyond thinking about, because it's just silly. It's just silly and lazy, and again, it all just makes me think that DC has had a bigger hand in this whole season than anyone wants to admit, and I guess that doesn't surprise me considering the showrunners have just left. I mean, I think that probably says a lot, right? But I just don't know if this season was the appropriate place to deal with Bruce's insecurities when we have not dealt with Ivy's yet. They're still very looming. and I would hate to see Harley focused on Bruce's pain on the next 2 episodes and not Ivy's when the Earth is terraformed and she potentially gets blamed for it. I do think it's interesting that this has ended as something that has been triggered by Bruce and not something that's been triggered by Ivy. I'm really curious about whether or not we are going to see a conversation between Joker and Ivy in the final 2 episodes, because there was a scene in the trailer, seemed to be them talking. I'm curious if Ivy's going to be the one that inadvertently saves the day, because she's the only one powerful enough to really kind of take on the green, right? And these zombies are going to be like green zombies, and green zombies in DC are usually created by Ivy under her control. So if I was writing this season, which again I'm not, as we can see, I would have Ivy be the secret hero of this whole story. However, based on a few things we know and just some assumptions I've made, I'm not sure how or if that will play out that way. I don't know, I guess part of me feels like if this episode had been part of a 13 episode season, I probably wouldn't blink. And it's probably the same with the Joker, right? They would be able to play out Harley and Ivy's story better, but I still can't work out why they have spent so much time focusing on Bruce and Joker this season and not literally the main characters. And I really hate that they feel the need to separate Harley and Ivy's arcs. I know that Harley's been helping with Frank, but it still doesn't feel like their goals are in the same place. And it almost feels like Harley has been keeping this hero thing as almost a secret, right? She didn't tell Ivy about Barbara for weeks. She didn't really tell her everything about Barbara. And she's also just promised to keep this secret for Bruce. And I don't love that look. I know that that's not the intention of the writers, to make it look like Harley is keeping a side of herself from Ivy, but it can feel like that a little bit, I think. I'm both super nervous about the next 2 episodes and really excited, right? I feel like they're really going to tip the scales one way or the other on whether I love this season overall or if it was kind of a failed disappointment. There really is something a bit off about how this season has come together. It definitely feels, and again, this is just my opinion because I'm a writer, right? And I think about things the way a writer might. There is something very off about how the character arcs have come together. Who has been considered important? What was considered important? We really should have had more Ivy getting over Kite Man and kind of dissecting that part of her life from last season, but it's been completely brushed off so that they can make a spin-off about Kite Man. So now we have a spin-off about Kite Man, an entire episode about Batman, an entire episode about Joker, and it's just... And I know I'm going to get shit for saying that because I already have. I don't know, does this show want to be Batman the Animated Series, or does it want to be the Harley version of that? It can't seem to make up its mind about what kind of show it wants to be. If it wants to be a show about Harley and Ivy, which it very much implied it did with the first 2 seasons, then it's not necessarily going the best way about it, in my opinion. It is very much starting to feel like a Gotham ensemble piece, which is fine if you were going to write Bruce and Selina this much into the show. I wish it had just been earlier on, because the original concept of kind of having Batman in the background, the same way he is in the background of like Teen Titans and things, was really interesting. And the reason the Batman episode worked originally was because it had those bookends with the neckbeards complaining about media. If you don't have those bookends and you just have an episode about the Joker, then you're kind of just becoming those 2 dudes, right? That's me talking about the Joker episode, right? This episode was not the solo episode of Bruce. It's not like we didn't see Harley and Ivy. I'm not saying we didn't. I don't know. It just... something felt a little weird to me. I don't know what it was. I guess I'm just not sure how I feel about this side of Harley and the route in which they are taking her character. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either, and that's not me saying that I don't love that psychiatrist Harley was used this episode. I just think it's very stupid and obvious that they are only choosing to use it, to use Harleen and to use Harley's medical degree when it suits a storyline that helps Batman. I don't find that very subtle. Not really. I'm not gonna lie. They didn't use it at all, really, in season 2, and it could have really helped in a lot of places, and they haven't really mentioned it at the beginning of this season. It's just something that they've kind of used for plot purposes, and I wish it was more than that, you know, because this should have always been that. Harley should always be written like this. But her relationship with Ivy shouldn't suffer for that. She doesn't need to be a superhero to be good at her job. And she is literally clown-themed. Stop that shit, I hate it. She can be clown-themed and Birds of Prey themed. She can have her modern pigtails, and we can still remember that she was a jester. This Last Jedi, kill the past, destroy it if you have to bullshit helps no one. It's not a character arc to just pretend that she's a different person now. And again, that's not necessarily relevant to this episode, although it is. It's kind of just a statement on Harley as a whole. She is literally the Harlequin, the Arlecchino. This is part of her history, part of Arlene Sorkin's history. You can't erase that, even if Harley does adapt. She's allowed to adapt. I want her to adapt. I prefer her in Hot Pants, but again, that doesn't mean I think she should kill her past. I think she should learn from it. And the two things are different, they just are. Well, sorry, this video has not been a review of the episode at all, has it? It's just been me moaning about Bruce. I love Bruce, and again, I really liked this episode. Mostly, as a whole, I liked this episode. I just didn't like the larger implications of that we are prioritizing Bruce and Joker and their feelings, emotions, and inner heartaches over Harley and Ivy's. I can't necessarily get behind that. I just can't. I'm going to just try to stay positive for the next two episodes. Really hope I get to see Ivy speak a bit more and not be a total dumbass. Hope I continue to see Harley using her so-called Dr. Harleen skills. Sorry about this one. Let's leave it at that. Thanks for being here. My name is Mage. Bye.